Hello, welcome. My name is Cooper Christiansi. Thank you for coming to this virtual panel discussion organized by the Rapoport Center for Human Rights and Justice at the University of Texas and the Southern Center for Inequality Studies at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg. It's great to be with all of you from all around the world today for this discussion on inequality and the green transition. This virtual panel is a joint collaboration between our two organizations. And for the past year and a half, our two centers have been working together to coordinate what we've been calling a transnational research collective on inequality, injustice, and the green transition. Our panel today is meant to reflect on the lessons we've learned in organizing this group, and thinking interdisciplinarily and transnationally between scholars and researchers at our two institutions about inequality and the green transition. I want to thank Neville Hode, who is the co-director of the Rapoport Center and professor of English at the University of Texas, and Julia Taylor, who's researcher on climate inequality at the SCIS, who have been the co-organizers of this research collective and who will be speaking on the panel today. I also want to thank Tendai Gonduri and Sri Senthil Kulmar, who are researchers and professional and PhD students who are members of the collective and who agreed to present with us on the panel here today. I really also want to take time to express gratitude to Professor Karen Engel, who's co-director of the Rapoport Center, and Imran Valodia, who is director of SCIS. Their vision and support for this collaboration made it all possible. And then I also want to acknowledge that this event is part of International Education Week at the University of Texas. And I want to thank and express gratitude to Texas Global, the International Education Office at UT, for encouraging us to organize this event featuring this collaboration between our two institutions. And without further ado, I'll launch into the rest of the introduction and sort of lay the groundwork for the issues, considerations, and themes that were at play in the meetings we've had among our research collective and the things that we'll talk about here today. It's become widely accepted that ecological destruction, climate change, and extractive developments will deepen and exacerbate local and global inequalities. The communities and countries that will be most disastrously affected by climate collapse are those communities and countries that are already underdeveloped and subordinated in local and global economic arrangements. For example, recent data released by the UN Development Program shows that agricultural losses from climate change will most deeply affect the world's poorest countries, even as highly developed countries face disaster as well. The great injustice baked into this inequity is that the poorest countries and communities are also those whose historic contributions to greenhouse gas emissions and ecological destruction are the lowest. In a 2022 article tracking carbon inequality within and among countries, the French economist Lucas Chanchel concluded that while 1/10 of the global population is responsible for nearly half of all emissions, half of the population emits less than 12% of emissions. This imbalance of responsibility with harm is the animating principle behind calls for common but differentiated responsibilities, restitution for loss and damage, and climate justice. The urgency of a green transition, the shift from a carbon-based economy to a society powered by sustainable environmental practices, is readily apparent, at least for most of the world's governments and peoples. At the same time, there is the danger that the green transition might not necessarily be a just transition. For many years, the Rapoport Center and the Southern Center for Inequality Studies have both been separately engaged in projects aiming to understand the structural drivers of wealth and income inequality, climate-infected, and otherwise. And from the Rapoport Center side, the outcome was a marvelous anthology co-edited by Neville and Professor Engel. Our interest in structural inequality has led to our shared concern with responses to environmental degradation and climate change that rely upon or re-entrench unequal structures. In other words, the current moment necessitates an examination of inequality in the green transition that leaves behind the assumption that greening our societies will automatically entail more just and equal societies. So SCIS and the Rapoport Center connected last year collaboratively to think about projects to better analyze and conceptualize the inequality threatened by the green transition. Key to our collaboration is understanding the ways that political economy, law, and policy are not just fundamentally disrupted by green transition policies, but also continued. As legal scholar Christine Shobal-Patel wrote in 2023, these continuities include the state and corporate drive for capital accumulation and the concentration of wealth, meaning an absence of redistribution. She observes that international law, embedded in the legacies of empire and domination, plays a key role in enabling these continuities on a global scale. So long as we see international law, and I would add economic policy and other practices around socio-technological policy as disruptive or protective of the planet, we miss these continuities, especially in the ways that it is protective of capital. So in addition to these continuities built into the green transition, our group is also eminently concerned with the disruptions entailed by the transition from carbon-heavy industries and trades, both particularly on workers, communities directly engaged with these activities, and also the building of dependent and extractive economic relationships in what has been called green extractivism or green colonialism. Researchers and community members increasingly warn of green sacrifice zones, places where the externalities of the green economy are concentrated through production, pollution, or extraction. So in discussions among our research collective, we've openly pondered how we can work through these inequalities coming from a variety of different geographic focuses and interdisciplinary approaches. One concept that's been especially interesting to think about together, given our different backgrounds, has been the concept of degrowth, which obviously is a very fraught concept and one that we bring a lot of different perspectives to, and I think illustrates the example of what can happen when we think together across borders, real and imagined. So our conversation today is going to be split into 3 parts. We want to first talk about the process of bringing together this transnational research collective that connected graduate student researchers at WITS and UT. And then we want to reflect a little bit on the substance of our conversations, right? What can we say about inequality in the green transition? What are we starting to think about this concept and this intersection as a result of our conversations together? And then, of course, if time permits, we'll have time for question and answer from the audience. So without further ado, we'll start our roundtable discussion. And I want to start with asking Neville to describe the process of deciding to build out this institutional collaboration. And I'm wondering what were our centers doing separately that we wanted to do together.
All right, thank you. And of course, I really want to thank Cooper, who has been the leader and the glue, along with Julia, who is Julia Taylor from SCIS, who will be coming shortly. She's arriving somewhere in the Northern Cape to do field work. From the Rapoport Center side, we've had a long history of research and advocacy collaboration with South African universities, most notably with the University of Cape Town, UCT, and the University of the Western Cape, UWC, where, I don't know, it's nearly 10 years ago now, we worked on a white paper on constitutionalism and economic and social rights. And then 2 years ago, we did a colloquium and a conference on land, labor, and livelihoods in crisis. The former was part of a long Ford Foundation grant on human rights and inequality. And the second is an extension of that inquiry into questions held under the sign of the future of work. And I mean, one of the things we've learned is we can't think of the green transition by itself. We've been thinking about how it's very embedded in local and global legal regimes, political economies, and imaginaries. Professor Imran Valodia, who directs SCIS at WITS, presented at one of those events. So I think, I mean, personal connections, shared worldviews are very important to the imagining of the beginning of this conference. The Rapoport Center's interest in environmental justice and climate justice grew out of this long investigation that Cooper's already mentioned into the drivers of a set of distributional problems that were increasingly called inequality. That quickly became clear that inequality was an inadequate shorthand for both describing and analyzing the great disparities of power and wealth in the world. We had a strong hunch that a transition to a green economy would not adequately address the deep historical processes that produced and reproduced those disparities. Then, fortuitously, a visit to Austin from a WITS delegation put us in touch with a group of people at WITS, but particularly the Southern Center for Inequality Studies. And after some back and forth around both topic and format, we decided on the topic that we're discussing here today. At the time, the Rapoport Center was working on a big conference called Disarming Toxic Empire on the environmental impacts of the life cycle of nuclearity. South Africa remains the only country in the world, in the history of the world, to voluntarily disband a nuclear weapons program. So we might have gone there. So, I mean, I think one arrives at things by synergies of energy, but also by processes of elimination. But we realized in the end, what we had most in common was a series of questions about climate justice and the risks of a green transition, which was increasingly looking like it would be neither just nor reparative. So then it became a question of how to assemble our cohort, our collective. I hate Zoom, but Zoom enables a certain kind of transnational collaboration that wasn't possible a decade ago. So it became some trivial things around time difference, but it quickly became clear as we read together what the questions were that we were most interested in. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it back to Cooper and ask him, what was the goal, or how did you understand the goal of this transnational research collective? How was it structured initially? And what advice might you give to others trying to build collaboratives like this? I'm not sure we're a model, but I'm interested in other people giving advice.
Wonderful.
So you can discuss the trade-offs between organic development of the collective versus structured and focused goals. The floor is yours.
No, thanks, Neville. And I'll mention that I see Julia has joined the group, and so we'll just invite her to join when she can. I know she's probably still in the midst of settling in after travel. But I think that organic piece that you mentioned, Neville, was really central to how we wanted to start off the goal of the research collective. We were really excited about the collaboration. We were extremely excited to be working with WITS and to be working alongside one another. And we wanted to have the organic, we wanted to build a group that then sort of organically decided, how we wanted to talk together about these issues and what sort of outputs we wanted to have. So we started simply by just saying, how do we get great students at both institutions who are interested in working on these issues, who are doing research on all of these fronts? How can we find them and bring them together? And we thought that the Transnational Research Collective idea was a great way of fulfilling that goal, because it naturally attracted the students who were one, interested in the topic at hand, but two, also very excited about the transnational piece of this engagement, right? There's a lot of interinstitutional opportunities to engage with people doing similar work with you, but sort of the ability to reach across oceans to connect people facing the same climate crisis, but in really different national contexts was really exciting. And I also say that we sort of imagined the transnational component at first, or at least I did, I think quite naively. I imagined naively the transnational component as sort of, oh, we have people in Texas in the United States, and we have people in Joburg in South Africa, and that's the transnational link. But as we brought students in, it became very clear that actually what was also transnational was that each researcher was doing work in a different site, right? It wasn't just, oh, all the people in Texas are doing work in Texas and all the people in South Africa are doing work in South Africa. No, we had people doing work in Mexico, Chile, Zimbabwe, other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, I think Kenya, obviously South Africa in the Austin area, but other parts of the American Southwest. And so I was really excited about that feature of the collaboration and that it was truly transnational. I think one of the things that was sort of a lesson for us and that we've tried to transition into how we do other collaborations like this is like there is a trade-off between being organic and being really highly structured. I think the organic nature of this collaboration has helped us get up to speed together and to think collaboratively together. But it's also meant that it's taken us a long time to sort of develop a common language that we can all use together. And so with that, I want to turn to the two sort of researchers, graduate students that we have represented here to ask how that happened. What was the process of joining the collective like, and what have you appreciated most about that process? And we'll start with Tendai and then move to Shri.
All right, thank you. So I received a call in my institutional email. I think it was from the Pro Vice Chancellor Climate Change Office. If not, then the Southern Center for Inequality Studies. But Julia works with both offices closely. So I responded, sharing what my research on climate change is about. Of course, I'm coming from a media background, so it's more like diplomatic optics, how citizens view their governments in relation to different climate and environmental policies. Yeah, so after a couple of weeks, I got the confirmation email, you've been selected. And I was like, oh, wow. Now I'm part of a reading group with colleagues from very far across, from Texas. And I especially like this because, often in my own experience, this journey is often a very shallow cocoon, we do have seminars, we do have workshops at the university, but I can't always be traveling for that and attending each and every, and also the focus is quite diverse, but this kind of anchored onto what I was already doing and I was really looking forward to it, and it kind of did not disappoint. One thing I wanted to focus on was what I hope to benefit was, getting a lot about climate change from different contexts at one go. There is just a lot to read, a lot to catch up on, and you need to stay afloat. And it can be overwhelming considering you also have your own thesis to write. So I kind of got that in different ways. So that was my journey. However it happened, which I got a glimpse into now, I knew a lot of work happened in hindsight, and I'm glad to be part of the team. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tendai. Shri, can you talk
Thanks,
about what
Tim.
the process has been like, and what have we been doing in the research collective over the last year?
Yeah, of course. Um, I came into the research collective similar to Tendai. I received the call. I think I actually had a personal like call out from Cooper as well, who he reached out and was like, Shri, I think you'll really be interested in this. And at the time, I was a little concerned about the commitment. I was also participating in the UT Environmental Law Clinic, and a lot of law school commitments tend to be a bit more rigid. Think inflexible and competitive could be apt adjectives. So I wasn't sure about what this environment would be like, but it was really organic. I felt it grow over the year, and I also found it to be a really inspiring community. So, like Tendai mentioned, the sense of overwhelm with catching up on all of the climate-related issues was something I felt very strongly in the spring of 2025, especially with the developments in the US. But having this transnational group, especially as Cooper asked, like what we were doing, I think in the start of the collective, a lot of what we were doing was going through readings that really connected our sometimes distinct, sometimes overlapping disciplines and coming together and sharing our experiences and our background and how we connected with those readings and kind of developing a system of conversation and a shared language on how we approach these issues. So that I found very enjoyable and gave me a wider perspective for a lot of my other work that year as well. So
Great. One of the things that we really wanted to do in this collaboration is to connect the two groups in ways beyond just meeting, you know, once a month or periodically, but to have them engage with the work that they were producing in their scholarship, in their classes, in their coursework. And so we actually utilized a model developed by the Institute for Global Law and Policy at Harvard University, and co 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 sorry, co-developed by our co-director, Professor Karen Engel, that allowed peer presentations of each other's work in a way that I felt very organic and exciting. And so essentially what this model is that rather than presenting our own work, we're matched with a peer who reads and presents our work for us. And this process, I think, really opened up ways in which we were all able to engage with each other's work and also take a step back and hear other people present our work and get a new lease on how our work is being read by others. And so each member of the collective was paired up with another member of the collective, and we worked really hard to connect across our sort of imagined geographic boundary, right? So we made sure that if we had someone from the United States, they were matched up with someone who was working in South Africa. That process was actually really smooth. I was a little bit nervous at first about that process because I was unsure if we'd really be able to find connections and collaborations. And I think that it goes to show the exciting feature of a collaboration like this, and that it was really actually very easy to connect, and pair up the students. We had an introductory meeting in which each student talked a little bit about what they were doing, what disciplinary backgrounds they were coming from, what sort of their methodologies and interests and research questions were. And based off of those notes, we matched sort of who we thought would be most aligned and able to talk to one another and really provide interesting insights into each other's work. And the most exciting part was that, we'd make we'd matches, and then you wouldn't be sure how exactly they'd work out. And then when both sides presented their work, it would be a a synthesis, a connection in a way that we weren't even imagining. And so new features and aspects of their work would be pulled out because of the, matching across disciplinary and geographic divides that we were facilitating. So I want to ask Tendai and Shri just to follow up and talk a little bit. I know, Shri, you haven't been able to have your work presented yet since we've been going through the entire group, but Tendai, what was it like to have your work presented by someone else in this process and to receive feedback in that way?
Okay, thank you, Cooper. So I was curious. I was curious if I had articulated myself well enough to be understood by someone who had no background, at least an intimate background as I did, and be able to to articulate it and share with others from their own understanding and perspective. And it was quite impressive that, oh, well, actually I wrote quite well. This came out just as I meant it to. So it was kind of reassuring to say, okay, you're doing something right. At least the facts and the content is something else, but at least in terms of presentation. So it was awesome getting that feedback. Another thing is after Cooper presented, because my colleague, the one I didn't pair with, got overwhelmed with another pressing task, so Cooper ended up presenting. And on expectations, I was asked, so what would you like? What kind of feedback would you like to do? And it was a paper I had presented and wanted to submit for a journal article. So I asked, please pep me. Yeah. And I really was pepped well. So the space really offered a sense of belonging. It offered a sense of connection and a sense of shared identity through research. It is a safe space, where you can present without fear of prejudice or whatnot, but just knowing that my work is going to be approached exactly and as objectively as possible. And I kind of got that. And well, I'm still working on it because I focused on something else. And now there was a contribution to say, understand also the journal that you want to submit to, and I went through and realized I had no citation made from that particular journal. So that is pretty much the only thing that I would like to adjust and then submit. So that was my experience in terms of presentation and how it felt, and also the excitement of having my work, and also having an opportunity to listen to my work through the eyes and mind and articulation of someone else. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tendai. It's a great paper.
Thank you.
Julie, it's so good to see you. I'm so glad you could join. I hope travel went smoothly. I wanted to know what this process of working together and building this collective has taught you about interdisciplinarity, transnational research, and building community in our academic world.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, thanks Cooper for holding the fort, and apologies that I've had to join late. I had joined and then my phone overheated because I'm in a very hot place. So then I couldn't, then my Wi-Fi disconnected. Anyway, so now I'm finally settled in stable Wi-Fi. But yeah, I think what I found really interesting is that while the Rapoport Center and the Southern Center for Inequality Studies kind of deal with justice and inequality respectively, we can kind of realize that they're also two sides of the same coin. That justice is the opposite of inequality and vice versa. And I think we've also taken quite different stances on these concepts because of our disciplinary backgrounds. And so, the Rapoport Center kind of is interested in legal frameworks nationally and internationally, whereas at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies, we are interested in kind of the more economic aspects of inequality. And And we kind of use a political economy lens, but we also have some sociologists and historians and economists, all working together. But yeah, the legal framework was quite new, and was really interesting to understand, even with a critical lens. I think often we kind of assume that, oh, well, people in legal research are just, fighting over nitty-gritty details of the law. When actually there's obviously a more critical academic aspect to legal research, which kind of questions the frameworks and tries to understand who is it serving. And so, yeah, my mind has definitely been opened to those frameworks, and I think the research collective has allowed us to kind of explore these differences in approaches by discipline, and also to broaden our geographic scope. So at the Southern Center for Inequality Studies, we do have an interest in kind of global south specifically. So we haven't done a lot of work on countries in the global north. But we also kind of had to question those differences and the boundaries between the two. We kind of realized that there's actually global souths within global north countries, and there are green sacrifice zones in the US and across different countries. So there were more similarities than we expected as well. Yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Thanks so much, Julia. Neville, I wanted to ask you the same question. You've been involved in a lot of these collaborations, as you mentioned at the top. What has this one taught you about interdisciplinarity and community?
I'll talk a little bit about process, but I want us to move to substance, because some of the readings and some of the papers, actually, and all of the papers, we've still got a few to workshop, were really interesting. So I think the IGLIP method works in the sense that it requires imaginative extension into somebody else's project. And it's also interesting to take on somebody's work to present it kind of as if it were yours, especially when it's in a different geographic context. It's obeying different interdisciplinary protocols. I mean, for me, the pairings worked best when there was some commonality around theme or question, and the difference was negotiated around discipline and geographic region. So I think and I think we really were interdisciplinary. I mean, we had geographers, we have history people, we have social sciences. What made me a little sad is we don't really have a critical humanities voice, which I think is also important. If one of the things the Rapoport Center is very interested in is how do we generate new imaginaries of climate justice. There haven't been, as far as I know, there haven't been a slew of novels written or films made about green sacrifice zones or carbon trading, though hopefully they're coming, which upsets me a little bit, because I like to think the social lags behind the imaginary, but at this point I think things are moving so fast that actually people's representational strategies and imaginings are taking a little longer to catch up. So I'm very happy to continue with this project. I think we're going to try and move into the phase of imagining a deliverable, thinking about what are the big debates we really want to intervene in, and what would be our, what is the commonality across everything that we've listened and heard. So I'm just going to give you a very quick, and Cooper, this might help as a segue into substance. Okay, I'm just going to give you titles for people who are not in the collective, so you get a sense of some of the things that have been presented. So Tendai presented a paper called Religion and Digital Responses to KwaZulu-Natal Floods in South Africa. So there we had the media lens. Katrina's working on renewable energy and land, agrarian, political economy. Sam Tabery, this paper is called Unthinkable Legalities and the Grounds of Global Law, working through the multi-level complexities of resource transitions and regional futures in southern Mexico. I mean, are you getting a sense of kind of the global and disciplinary and interdisciplinary reach of our contributors and participants? We have someone working on comparative barriers to transportation access in Austin and Boston. We have somebody else working on South Africa's biofuel economy and inclusive evidence-based climate policy. So I think it's not just the interdisciplinary, it's also the places where interventions are imagined. Scholarship, policy, and community. So it's been a real pleasure to be learning with this collective. So I want to thank everybody who's participated.
Thanks, Neville. And I think we'll continue our transition into the substance to ask if the group, and we'll start maybe here with Julia, if you noticed sort of different approaches or assumptions coalescing into a common language or intervention around inequality and the green transition, and if you noticed any differences that popped up in the ways in which we were thinking about these issues, either across disciplines, within disciplines, across geographies, and what you've observed so far.
Yeah, thanks, Cooper. I think, as I mentioned earlier, I think there is an interesting commonality with how we are, with I guess the language of sacrifice zones, that we kind of all acknowledging that, well, this transition is not benefiting everybody, and so who are the vulnerable groups, or whose benefits or access to resources is being sacrificed in this process. And I think the other commonality that's come up for me is the importance of understanding land kind of issues and land as a as a central issue. I think it's come up across a few different papers, and whether it's access to land, forms of land use, it kind of ties in with the kind of sacrifice zones as well, what kinds of land are in these sacrifice zones and where are they spatially, and what are those patterns. It does feel like that's a potential kind of meaty topic that we can pull on, or thread that we can pull on in the future.
Yeah, I'd really echo that sort of coalescing around land that's been really happening. I think obviously land, the natural environment, central to questions of ecology and climate change, but also central to questions of wealth distribution, of law, of property. And so I really think, like, as Neville said, we're moving into more of a substantive intervention. I think that will be sort of key to how we're thinking about inequality in the green transition, as sort of space, land, law, and economies as they build together. I'd also say, like, one of the really striking things for me is that we sort of saw, like, I sort of was reminded that we live on a shared planet a lot when we were discussing our papers, and sort of the same sort of themes or issues were coming up. The most striking to me was that there was a series of really devastating floods in Travis County in Central Texas, here in Austin over the summer, costing many lives and really destroying communities. And that same week that those floods were happening, we were discussing Tendai's paper about the KwaZulu-Natal floods, and responses to them. So it was very, striking to be talking about responses to these earlier disasters in a deeply different geographic place, but to see the like resonance from Austin to South Africa of these natural disasters that are only going to be a common feature of our climate future. So I think that was the other sort of like exciting part of seeing commonalities, is like actually we're dealing with a lot of the same issues because we live on a shared planet and we share many of the same legal, political, and economic systems that are driving these challenges. So I want to ask Shri and Tendai to share a little bit about like the most impactful paper they've read or sort of concept they've discussed throughout the collective, and sort of what sort of you've gotten from the substantive discussions we've had so far. So Shri, what was a paper or discussion that's really stuck out to you, or that sticks with you?
Okay. So I think for a discussion topic, something that stuck out to me was a piece. It was a very short piece. It was a website article on marine protected areas in Chagos. And at the time, I was in a biodiversity law seminar, and this was something I had come into from a pure like environmental law perspective, thinking about the protection of marine resources. And I hadn't really understood more of the social or geopolitical context to the Chagos Islands. And the website article, we really criticized, but also, so we reflected, and then we were also somewhat critical regarding the kind of Western perspective on ownership and access to resources, in which the demand really was to create a westernized framework of protection of marine wildlife, rather than and almost criticizing the return of Chagosian land and Chagosian native resources to the people of Chagos. And that really tied into also a discussion on member projects that I found really interesting, with a literature review by Katrina regarding property ownership, and she had this political economy perspective on land rights and access to land. And that really connects to what I think Julia was saying, the shared language around ownership and access to resources. At the time, I was also a property law academic assistant. So I was teaching first year students about just like domestic, especially Texas oriented property rights, like the rule of capture, which enforces a right of ownership over a resource that an owner appropriates. And there's really a lot of this concept of dominance and extraction, and really reflecting on how that view seems to still be baked into the green transition, even if we're discussing other resources that might on the surface seem more beneficial than fossil fuels. Katrina's paper discussed the the colonial and capitalistic like imaginations of common resources like wind or the sun, and kind of these ownership perspectives of extraction that get fueled into any resource that we might view as a collective shared one. So I thought that was really fascinating to explore, and tied in very neatly to other work I was doing at the law school.
Okay, thank you, Shri.
Mhm.
So for me, I'll speak to vocal. I like vocal, and what really stuck was how she expresses how climate change does not happen in a vacuum, but it is subsumed in other structural, economic, political, cultural factors surrounding us. So we may think about it in all those dimensions, but in the end, what is the impact on a specific community and so forth? And I would like to relate this to Jordan's paper. Is it the one, Jordan and Tim, about the electric facility in Texas? and the study on community perspectives and whatnot. So that is their reality in their specific environment, but there are legal structures. There are also, forms of structural violence that can also happen, and a whole lot of other issues discussed in the paper. So while looking at it from the state side, it also related to the global south side. And I thought about it in connection to how I have often imagined challenges related to climate change in the context of global north problems, global south problems. And in the end, you realize that we are all in this sphere where there are external and internal factors combined that influence, that impact our relationship, our responses, our digestion of and meaning making also of what is climate change, what is green transition, and the impacts. And in the okay, I'm losing my point, but I hope you find me somewhere there. So where I was trying to relate the Texas case, electric plant case, to this South African space in terms of green transition, particularly in terms of debates around hydrogen energy. I recall how this would be progressive as a response to climate challenges and so forth. But at the same time, when you come down to the community, to the person affected, you realize that it's a specialist kind of space, which means all the other people, if that really carries off in full force and at the invasion's space, would be affected. So I think in sum, what I'm trying to express is that when we have these discussions, it's the initial consideration should be what's surrounding us, what are the structures, what are the frameworks of knowledge making, and also who is the impacted party. And it goes down to the people who are in the first space, who are in the first instance also the custodians of knowledge, and also who would help us reflect on whatever approaches we would want to use in studying various studies. I know I mumbled and jumbled a lot, but I hope you were able to get something out of this.
No, thank you, Tendai. And I think you ended on a really strong point about knowledge and about local control and understanding of land. I think we're going to move into the Q&A session. So please feel free to either chat your question or submit it using the Teams Q&A function. I don't see any that have indicated yet any questions. I'll give it a couple seconds, and then as people are formulating the questions, I might take one and pass it to Neville.
Cooper, while we're waiting, should I ask you a question? Could you reflect on what you think it means to have this collective operating in this current kind of political context around the green transition, where kind of international policy is shifting quite dramatically?
Thanks, Julia. It's a very interesting question. I think, there were sections of the entire of our meetings together in which we just sort of spent the first 10, 15 minutes sort of sharing, here is how things have dramatically changed in the way that environmental policy happens in our different geographic contexts. Obviously, there's been a dramatic political shift in the United States since we started this collaboration in October 2024. And it's almost been sort of made sort of the discussions around inequality and green transition somewhat feel a little bit moot, because it also feels sometimes like, oh, the prospects of green transitioning happening in many communities and contexts, at least directly related into the United States, seems much less certain than before. So it sort of is like, okay, why critique something that isn't happening or can't happen? And I think it's important to push back against that, because one, there's still green transitions happening even as political contexts have dramatically shifted. Political contexts haven't dramatically shifted everywhere, right? Just one country can dramatically shape the course of the world, but there's other contexts in which green transitional policies are still moving forward. And then there's also ways in which it becomes even more important to be critical of distributional inequalities, even if the language or the sort of political milieu around the green transition have shifted dramatically from focusing on a just transition. So I think that at first, sort of the dramatic shifts made it feel very sort of tenuous and unproductive to sort of continue to be thinking about sort of critiques of this aspirational policy goal. But as time has gone on, it's actually, I think, become more and more important to make sure that we aren't reactive to shifting tides, but rather focused continually on issues of justice and equality. All right. I don't see any questions yet, so I just sort of wanted to ask Julia and Neville about what is next for the collective. What sort of going to be the goal and role of the collective moving forward?
Okay, I see Julia is still muted, so okay. Julia, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go?
No, you go ahead.
All right, I think we're going to carry on doing what we're doing, which is we've still got quite a few participants' papers to workshop. And then we're talking about maybe trying to do a special issue of a journal, which would be a lot of work, but I think we're obviously deeply interested in the substance of this, but we're also interested in providing professionalizing opportunities for the cohort, both editorial, having the experience of peer review, and getting a line item on your CVs. So and I think we'd also like to maybe think about writing a grant together, so we could maybe meet in person and convene that way. I'm very glad Cooper and Julia had the opportunity to meet in Johannesburg, and I think Imran and Karen met in Cape Town. I mean, the virtual format works for this, but I think connections deepen, and it's much easier to have spontaneous conversations. I'm sorry, the breakout room is not the same thing as lunch. If we can meet in person. So I think we're looking towards what the deliverables, even though I think that language is part of the problem, might be from this cohort. And then we're also hoping that those individual pairings might also come up with further ideas of what they might like to do together. So keep the conversation open, look towards a publication, and look towards finding funding for an in-person convening. I mean, that's what I see, but we have a lot of people in this cohort or collective, and of course we want to listen to them as carefully as possible.
I want to interject and ask the group to respond to a question we got in the chat, which is great. It says, as an anthropologist of energy, I'm thinking about how those living in sacrifice zones may articulate the undue burden placed on their communities. And my question for scholars in both regions, are there similarities or differences that struck you in how people in these areas think about what it means to live in sacrifice zones? And has this given you insight into your own projects? Julia, would you like to take this one on?
Yeah, sure. Just a quick note on the previous question around what's next. We also have a smaller term goal of having a WhatsApp group where we share kind of youthful notes and ideas, which is always nice for community building. And yeah, I think kind of on this kind of how do people living in these areas articulate the burden? It's really interesting. So I am, this town that I've just arrived in is called Katu. It's a really strange place in the Northern Cape of South Africa. And it is a town that was built because of a massive iron ore mine. I think one of the largest open cast mines in South Africa. And there's also solar power plants that have been built in this town. And so I've been doing interviews and surveys with people who are living near and working on the solar power plants. But there's such an overlap with the kind of the impact of this massive mine in the same or kind of close by, that I think it's difficult for people to articulate themselves as experiencing a specific sacrifice burden when there's this massive mine that's so kind of overbearing. And then there's this kind of smaller solar plant, which has also kind of meant that people have, it was kind of a farm-owned land that was then sold to a company, and the kind of residents of the nearby town kind of have seen it being built, some people have gotten jobs, but not many have gotten good long-term jobs. And so there's kind of this ongoing sense of crisis, I think, in many of the rural towns in South Africa. And it's not necessarily attributed to, I guess often the mine is the large entity that takes up a lot of space, but it's not necessarily attributed to, the solar plant or a certain value chain. So I think it's an interesting question because, as academics, we can come in and say, well, this is why things are so bad, this mine and the municipality and governance. But I think it does, this idea of sacrifice zones does link so much to how our states and municipalities and local governments are running and providing services or not. I think that kind of, to me, is what people talk about most when you're asking about kind of day-to-day challenges. Sorry, that's a bit of a rambling answer, but I hope that was useful.
And Tendai, your work shows exactly how people deploy religion, act of God discourse in the face of climate disaster. So I think people have very different vocabularies, historical, affective, for understanding what's happening.
Yeah. So yes, according to the religious perspective, yes, and again, immediate things that would have happened in the near past and so forth kind of shape the narratives. So in connection to the KwaZulu-Natal floods, a lot of perspectives came. One of the things that I remember intimately is that there was no formal name. When these cyclones and whatnot happen, there's someone who names them. But there wasn't such for the KwaZulu-Natal floods, and someone was like, we can as well call it flood Helen, you know, just to demonstrate how the politics is messed up. So people kind of find different frames of making sense of something. And right now I'm looking at the COP and how Zimbabweans and South Africans from the ex-spheres made sense of it. And you find that it's constructed a lot around the domestic politics, around perceived diplomatic positions and relations to particular bilateral partners. And that kind of then provide frames in which to make various meanings. Yeah, so quite closely relatable.
We are running out of time. I'd love to chat more about this sacrifice zones question, Jenny. I might send you a couple articles if you're interested in learning more from the U.S. perspective on how that term is deployed. It just goes for me to say thank you so much to all of you for joining us here, whether it's your morning, afternoon, late at night. And thank you so much to my panelists, Neville, Tendai, Shri, and Julia, for contributing to this discussion. I look forward to continuing the research collective with all of you. And I want to invite our attendees. We mentioned this book at several points, and the Beyond Inequality and Futures of Work project the Rapoport Center has been doing. If you're interested at all in a book launch for that anthology, there will be one featuring Neville and Professor Karen Engel next Monday, and I will put the link to that event in the chat, or the Q&A, I should say, in case you want to access it. So thank you all so much for coming, and stay safe, and see you again soon.